Mei Lin was 67 years old when she walked into the grand ballroom of the hotel where she had worked for nearly 4 decades. But this time, she was not carrying a mop or pushing a cleaning cart. This time, she was wearing a simple blue dress that her daughter had picked out for her. This time, she was a guest. Her granddaughter was getting married. The ballroom looked different from this side of things. When you spend your life cleaning a place, you notice every crack in the wall, every stain on the carpet, every fingerprint on the glass. You see the dust that hides in corners and the scratches on the furniture that nobody else pays attention to. But tonight, Mei Lin tried to see it the way the guests saw it. The golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, the white flowers arranged on every table, the soft music playing in the background. It was beautiful. She had helped make it beautiful for hundreds of weddings over the years. She had polished these floors. She had cleaned these windows. She had made sure every detail was perfect for strangers she would never meet. And now, finally, it was her turn to enjoy. Mei Lin found a seat at a table near the back of the room. She preferred it there. Even though she was family, even though she had every right to sit at the front, she felt more comfortable in the shadows. That was where she had spent most of her life, after all. She watched as the other guests arrived. Women in expensive dresses, men in tailored suits. They walked with confidence, like they belonged in places like this. They greeted each other with big smiles and loud voices. They took photos and laughed and ordered drinks from the bar. Mei Lin smoothed down the fabric of her dress and folded her hands in her lap. She did not know how to talk to these people. She did not know what to say. Her English was good enough for work, good enough to understand instructions and answer simple questions. But it was not good enough for small talk at fancy parties. So she sat quietly and watched. Her mind drifted back to a time long before this hotel, long before this country, long before she became the woman she was today. She thought about the village in China where she grew up. A small place with dirt roads and wooden houses. A place where everyone knew everyone and nobody had very much. But the village had a school. And the school had a piano. Mei Lin remembered the first time she heard it. She was 7 years old, walking past the music room on her way home. The sound stopped her in her tracks. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Notes floating through the air like birds. Melodies that made her heart feel too big for her chest. She pressed her face against the window and watched the teacher play. His fingers moved across the black and white keys like magic. She did not understand how anyone could make something so wonderful. From that day on, Mei Lin would sneak to the music room whenever she could. She would sit outside the door and listen. Sometimes, when the room was empty, she would tiptoe inside and touch the keys. Just touch them. She was too afraid to press down. Too afraid someone would catch her. Too afraid that the magic would break. She asked her mother once if she could take piano lessons. Her mother had looked at her with tired eyes and said, "We cannot afford that, little one." Maybe someday. Someday became Mei Lin's favorite word. Someday, she would learn to play. Someday, she would make music of her own. Someday, the beautiful sounds would come from her fingers instead of just living in her dreams. But someday kept getting pushed further and further away. When she was 16, her father got sick. Mei Lin had to leave school and work in the rice fields to help her family survive. When she was 22, she married a kind man named Wei who worked in construction. When she was 25, she had her first child. Then another. Life became about survival. About making sure there was food on the table and clothes on her children's backs. There was no time for music. There was no money for dreams. When Mei Lin was 30, her husband got an opportunity to work in America. They packed everything they owned into 2 small suitcases and flew across the ocean to a country where they knew no one. And understood very little. Those first years were the hardest of her life. Wei worked long hours at construction sites while Mei Lin cleaned houses and took care of the children. They lived in a tiny apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors. They ate the same cheap meals every day because that was all they could afford, but they were building something. A future, a better life for their children. Then, when Mei Lin was 35, Wei fell from a scaffold at work. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Mei Lin did not have time to grieve. She had 3 children who needed her. 3 children who were depending on her. She took a job as a housekeeper at the Grand Belmont Hotel, and she worked there every single day for the next 32 years. She worked when she was sick. She worked when her back hurt so much she could barely stand. She worked when her children graduated from school and when they got married and when they gave her grandchildren. She worked through holidays and birthdays and every day in between. The guests at the hotel never really saw her. They walked past her in the hallways without a glance. They left their dirty towels on the floor and their trash on the nightstands and their complaints at the front desk. To them, she was invisible. Just another cleaning lady. Just another nameless face in a uniform. But Mei Lin never complained. This job had put food on her table. This job had sent her children to college. This job had given her family a life that she could never have imagined back in that little village in China. And now, sitting in this ballroom at her granddaughter's wedding, she felt proud. Tired, yes, but proud. Her granddaughter, Lily, was the first person in their family to become a doctor. She was marrying a young man from a wealthy family. A good family. They would have a good life together. Mei Lin had sacrificed everything for this moment. Every dream she had ever had, she had put aside so that her children and grandchildren could dream instead. And that was okay. That was what mothers and grandmothers did. But as she sat there in the back of the room, watching the guests laugh and dance and celebrate, her eyes kept drifting to one corner of the ballroom. There, under a soft spotlight, sat a grand piano. It was black and shiny, its surface polished to perfection. Mei Lin knew this piano. She had cleaned it hundreds of times over the years. She had wiped down its keys and dusted its lid and polished its legs until they gleamed. But she had never played it. She had never even tried. Now, looking at it from across the room, she felt something stir inside her chest. Something old and familiar. Something she thought she had buried a long time ago. The little girl who pressed her face against the window was still in there somewhere. The little girl who dreamed of making beautiful music was still alive. And tonight, for the first time in 60 years, Mei Lin was going to let her out. The wedding ceremony had been beautiful. Mei Lin had cried when her granddaughter walked down the aisle. She had cried when the young couple exchanged their vows. She had cried when they kissed for the first time as husband and wife. These were happy tears. The kind of tears that come when your heart is too full to hold everything inside. Now the reception was in full swing. Guests were eating and drinking and laughing. A jazz band played soft music in one corner while people moved around the room, talking and taking photographs. The energy was warm and joyful, the way a wedding should feel. Mei Lin stayed at her table near the back. Her daughter had come by a few times to check on her, asking if she needed anything. Her son had brought her a plate of food and a glass of water. They were good children. They loved her. But they also knew that their mother was more comfortable observing than participating. She picked at her food without much appetite. Her eyes kept returning to the piano. It sat there so quietly, waiting. The jazz band was using electronic instruments, so the piano remained untouched. It looked almost lonely to Mei Lin, like it was waiting for someone to bring it to life. She thought about all the times she had cleaned that piano. Early mornings before the guests woke up. Late nights after everyone had gone to bed. She would spray the polish on a soft cloth and wiped down every inch of it. Sometimes, when she was sure no one was watching, she would let her fingers hover over the keys. Just hover. Never pressing down. Never making a sound. She had been too afraid. Afraid someone would catch her. Afraid she would look foolish. Afraid that after all these years of dreaming, she would discover that she had no talent at all. But tonight felt different. Tonight, something inside her was shifting. Maybe it was being in this room as a guest instead of a worker. Maybe it was watching her granddaughter start a new chapter of her life. Maybe it was the realization that she was 67 years old and time was no longer something she could waste, whatever it was. Mei-Lin felt a pull toward that piano that she could not explain. She stood up from her chair. Her legs felt a little shaky, but she steadied herself against the table. Then she began to walk across the ballroom. It was not a long walk. Maybe 50 steps. But to Mei-Lin, it felt like the longest journey of her life. Each step took her further from the safety of her corner and closer to something she had been running from for 60 years. Her own dream. She did not go directly to the piano. Instead, she stopped near the entrance to the kitchen, where a young woman in a black dress was holding a clipboard and speaking into a small radio. This was the wedding coordinator. Mei-Lin had seen her earlier, directing the staff and making sure everything ran smoothly. Mei-Lin waited politely until the woman finished her conversation. Then she cleared her throat softly. The coordinator turned around with a practiced smile. "Yes, can I help you?" Mei-Lin's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I was wondering, would it be possible for me to play the piano? Just one song. For my granddaughter." The coordinator's smile flickered. Her eyes moved up and down, taking in Mei-Lin's simple dress, her gray hair, her worn hands with their short fingernails and rough skin. These were not the hands of a pianist. These were the hands of someone who had spent a lifetime scrubbing floors and washing dishes. "I'm sorry," the coordinator said, her voice polite but dismissive. "We have a professional pianist scheduled for later this evening. The piano is reserved." "I understand," Mei-Lin said. "I just thought, since it is not being used right now, maybe I could—" "Ma'am." The coordinator cut her off with a small laugh. "I appreciate the thought, but this is a very expensive instrument. We really need to leave it to the professionals." Mei-Lin felt her cheeks grow warm. She nodded and started to turn away, but she had not been as quiet as she thought. A small group of guests standing nearby had overheard the conversation. One woman, draped in diamonds and holding a glass of champagne, whispered something to her husband. They both chuckled softly. Another man, one of the groom's relatives, shook his head with an amused smile. "Did she really just ask to play the piano?" he muttered to his wife. "That's sweet." The word sweet was not meant as a compliment. Mei-Lin could hear the condescension in it, the pity. To these people, she was just a silly old woman who did not know her place. Her son appeared at her elbow. His face was tight with embarrassment. "Mom," he whispered, taking her arm. "What are you doing? Come back to the table." "I just wanted to play something for Lily," Mei-Lin said quietly. "Mom, please?" His voice was strained. "Don't do this. You'll embarrass yourself. You'll embarrass the family." Those words hit Mei-Lin like a punch to the stomach. Embarrass the family. After everything she had done for this family. After all the years of sacrifice and hard work and putting everyone else's needs before her own. After giving up every dream she had ever had so that her children could have better lives. And now, the one time she wanted something for herself, she was an embarrassment. She felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of these people who were already looking at her like she was some kind of joke. "You're right," she said to her son. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." She turned to walk back to her table, her head down, her heart heavy, and then she heard a voice. "Grandma?" Maylin looked up. Her granddaughter was standing in front of her, still wearing her beautiful white wedding dress. Her eyes were concerned, but also curious. "Grandma, what's wrong?" "What happened?" Maylin shook her head. "Nothing, little one. It's nothing. Go enjoy your party." But Lily did not move. She looked at her uncle, then at the coordinator, then at the guests who were still watching with amused expressions. She was smart, this granddaughter of hers. She understood exactly what had happened without anyone saying a word. "Grandma," Lily said softly, taking both of Maylin's hands in her own. "Did you want to play the piano?" Maylin hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, to pretend that the whole thing had never happened, to go back to being invisible in the corner where she belonged. But another part of her, the part that had been sleeping for 60 years, whispered something else. "Yes," she admitted. "I wanted to play something for you, for your wedding day. But it's silly. I shouldn't have asked." Lily squeezed her hands. "Why is it silly?" "Because I'm not a professional. Because I'm just—" Maylin trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Just what?" Lily's voice was gentle but firm. "Just my grandmother? Just the woman who raised my mother? Just the person who worked her whole life so that I could become a doctor?" Maylin could not answer. Her throat was too tight. Lily turned to the wedding coordinator. When she spoke, her voice was no longer soft. It was the voice of a woman who was used to being listened to. The voice of a doctor. The voice of someone who knew her own worth and the worth of the people she loved. "This is my grandmother," Lily said. "She wants to play the piano at my wedding. Please make that happen." The coordinator opened her mouth to protest, but something in Lily's eyes stopped her. She glanced around nervously, then nodded. "Of course," she said. "Whenever she's ready." Lily turned back to Maylin and smiled. It was the same smile she'd had as a little girl, when she would crawl into her grandmother's lap and ask for stories about China. "Grandma," she said, "I would love to hear you play." The ballroom had grown quieter. People were watching now, curious about the small drama unfolding near the piano. Some looked skeptical. Some looked impatient. A few were already whispering to each other, wondering what this old woman could possibly have to offer. Maylin looked at her granddaughter. She looked at the piano. She looked at all the faces waiting to see what she would do. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her ears. But for the first time in 60 years, she was not going to run away from her dream. She was going to walk toward it. "Okay," Maylin whispered. "I'll play." Maylin walked toward the piano, and with every step, memories flooded through her mind. Memories that no one in this room knew about. Memories that she had kept hidden for 5 long years. It had started with a doctor's appointment. She remembered that day like it was yesterday. She had been 62 years old, still working full-time at the hotel, still taking care of everyone else before herself. She had been feeling tired for months, but she ignored it. She was always tired. That was just life. But then came the pain. A dull ache in her stomach that would not go away. She ignored that too, for as long as she could. She did not have time to be sick. She had bills to pay and a job to do and grandchildren who needed her. Finally, her daughter forced her to see a doctor. And that doctor sent her to another doctor. And that doctor ran tests. And then came the phone call that changed everything. Cancer. The word had hit her like a truck. She remembered sitting in her small apartment, alone, staring at the wall for hours. She thought about her husband, Wei, who had died so suddenly all those years ago. She thought about her children, who still needed her even though they were grown. She thought about her grandchildren, who she wanted so desperately to watch grow up. And then, strangely, She thought about the piano. She thought about that little girl in China who had pressed her face against the window and dreamed of making beautiful music. She thought about all the years she had told herself, someday. She thought about how someday had turned into decades. And decades had turned into a lifetime, and now that lifetime might be coming to an end. Something broke inside her that night. Or maybe something finally healed. She was not sure which, but when she woke up the next morning, Mei Lin made a decision. If she was going to die, she was not going to die with her dreams still locked inside her. She was going to learn to play the piano. No matter what. She did not tell anyone about the cancer. Not at first. She knew her children would worry. She knew they would want to take care of her, to hover over her, to treat her like she was already gone. She was not ready for that. She needed to do this thing for herself, by herself. Before she let anyone else in, she started her treatments, chemotherapy, radiation. The doctors were hopeful but careful with their words. They told her the cancer had been caught early. They told her she had a good chance. But they also told her it would be a difficult road. It was. There were days when she was so sick she could barely lift her head. Days when she wondered if it was all worth it. Days when she wanted to give up on everything, including her silly dream of playing piano. But she did not give up. Instead, she started looking for a way to learn. She could not afford private lessons. She could not afford to buy a piano. But she was a woman who had survived poverty and loss and immigration and 30 years of hard work. She knew how to find a way when there seemed to be no way. She found a community center on the other side of the city. It was a small place, run by volunteers, that offered free classes to senior citizens. Art classes, dance classes, and yes, music classes. Mei Lin signed up for piano lessons. Her teacher was a retired music professor named Mr. Zhou. He was 81 years old, with white hair and gentle hands and a patience that seemed endless. When Mei Lin told him that she had never played a single note in her life, he just smiled. "Then we start at the beginning," he said. "That is always the best place to start." Those first lessons were humbling. Mei Lin's fingers were stiff from years of scrubbing and cleaning. They did not want to move the way she told them to. The simple exercises that Mr. Zhou gave her felt impossible. She would practice for hours and still make mistakes that a child could avoid, but she kept going. After each lesson, she would take the bus to a second-hand store and play on the old keyboard they had in the corner. The owner was a kind woman who let Mei Lin practice for free as long as she did not disturb the other customers. Mei Lin would sit there for hours, headphones plugged in, playing the same scales over and over until her fingers ached. Then, one day, she found a miracle. Someone in her apartment building was throwing away an old electronic keyboard. It was missing a few keys, and the sound was tinny and cheap. But to Mei Lin, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She carried it up 3 flights of stairs to her tiny apartment. She set it up in the corner of her bedroom. And from that day on, she practiced every single night. She would come home from chemotherapy, exhausted and nauseous, and she would practice. She would come home from a 10-hour shift at the hotel, her back screaming with pain, and she would practice. She would wake up at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, and she would put on her headphones and practice. Her neighbors never knew. Her children never knew. Her grandchildren never knew. This was her secret, her private battle, her gift to herself. The months passed. The treatments continued. And slowly, something miraculous happened. The cancer began to retreat. The doctors were pleased. They used words like remission and recovery. They told her she was lucky. They told her she was strong. They told her she had beaten the odds. Mei Lin knew the truth. She had not beaten anything. She had simply refused to die before she learned to play the piano. And now that she was going to live, She was not going to stop. She kept taking lessons with Mr. Joe. She kept practicing every night. She moved from simple exercises to real songs, from easy melodies to complicated pieces, from careful, halting notes to music that actually sounded like music. Mr. Joe was amazed by her progress. "You have a gift," he told her one day. "You should have started 60 years ago." Mei Lin just smiled. "I started when I was supposed to start," she said. Not a moment too soon, not a moment too late. By the time she was 65, Mei Lin could play Chopin. By 66, she could play Beethoven. By 67, she could play pieces that most people spend a lifetime trying to master. But she never told anyone. Part of it was fear. She was afraid that if she told people, they would expect something from her. They would want her to perform, to prove herself, to be something she was not sure she could be. Part of it was pride. She did not want pity. She did not want people to see her as the poor old woman who had learned piano to distract herself from dying. She wanted to be seen as a musician, a real musician, not a charity case. And part of it was something else, something harder to explain. For 60 years, Mei Lin had lived for other people. She had sacrificed her dreams so that her family could have better lives. She had put herself last always, without complaint. But this, the piano, was hers alone. It was the one thing she had done purely for herself, the one thing that belonged only to her. And she was not ready to share it until now. Now, standing in front of the grand piano at her granddaughter's wedding, Mei Lin realized that it was time. Time to stop hiding. Time to stop being afraid. Time to show the world who she really was. Not just a cleaning lady. Not just a grandmother. Not just a woman who had survived cancer, but a musician. A dreamer. A woman who had finally, after 67 years, found her voice. She sat down on the piano bench. The leather was cool beneath her. The keys stretched out before her, black and white, waiting. The room was quiet now. Everyone was watching. She could feel their eyes on her back. She could feel their doubt, their curiosity, their pity. But Mei Lin did not care anymore. She closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She placed her fingers on the keys, and then she began to play. Oxer, who had just won the biggest fight of her life. The audience roared even louder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andre announced, "remember this night. Remember this face. Because you have just witnessed the birth of a star." That night changed everything. Within days, the video of Sophia's performance had spread across the internet. Millions of people watched the moment Andre Rieu walked onto the stage. Millions more shared the clip of him kneeling beside the piano bench, telling her she played better than him. News stations around the world ran the story. Newspapers printed her photo on their front pages. But Sophia did not care about any of that. What she cared about was the music. True to his word, Andre Rieu arranged for the finest piano teachers in Europe to work with Sophia. That summer, she traveled to 12 different countries with his orchestra. She performed the second waltz on stages that had hosted the greatest musicians in history. And every single night, the audience gave her a standing ovation. Elena was there for every concert. She sat in the front row, watching her daughter do the impossible. Sometimes she would think back to that day in the hospital parking lot, when the doctors had told her Sophia would never see. She had cried so many tears that day, terrified of what the future would hold. If only she could have seen this future. If only she could have known that her blind daughter would one day stand on the world's greatest stages, creating light with nothing but her fingers and her heart. Today, Sophia is no longer a little girl. She is a young woman studying at one of the most prestigious music academies in the world. She has performed in over 30 countries. She has released 2 albums that have topped classical music charts. And she has inspired countless other children with disabilities to chase their dreams. But no matter how famous she becomes, Sophia never forgets where she came from. She still visits Grandma Rosa every time she returns home. She still plays on that old dusty piano in her grandmother's living room. And she still keeps the scratched CD that started everything, even though it no longer plays. When people ask her about that night, about the moment Andre Rio appeared behind her, she always says the same thing. I could not see him, but I could feel him. And in that moment, I understood that music is not about what you can see. It is about what you can feel. It is about connecting with other souls who understand the same language. Mr. Rio and I had never met before that night. We had never rehearsed together. But when he started playing, it felt like I had known him my whole life. That is the power of music. It turns strangers into family. Andre Rio still keeps a photograph in his dressing room. It shows a small girl in a white dress sitting at a grand piano, her sightless eyes closed, her face glowing with joy. Below the photograph, he has written 3 words. She showed me. When people ask him what those words mean, he smiles and tells them about the night a blind 9-year-old girl taught the King of Waltz what music was really about. I thought I knew everything about the second waltz, he says. I had played it 10,000 times. But Sophia showed me that I had only been playing the notes. She played the soul. And that made all the difference. Some stories end with happily ever after. But Sophia's story did not end that night. It was only the beginning. Because when you find the courage to share your gift with the world, when you refuse to let your limitations define you, when you turn your darkness into light, the story never really ends. It just keeps getting more beautiful.